Now, Judge President Mandisa Maya may be the country's next female Chief Justice. Now, the JSC made the recommendation after a week of interviews. The process was marked by unsubstantiated accusations and arguments between commissioners. Some have even called it a disgrace. Let's get the view of political analyst Sipho Seepe, who has written an opinion piece on these particular interviews. Professor, many thanks for your time this morning. And before we go into the details around the recommendation that's been made by the JSC, just share with the viewers your overall view on the process that took place last week and the criticism that came about during and afterwards.
Well, I think the process is an open process that gives the public a sense of what type of judges they have, but also what type of Chief Justice they will have. The most important aspect of it is really about giving confidence to the judiciary. So one cannot quibble so much with the candidates that were put, because if you look at their credentials in terms of experience, you cannot fault them. If you look at the other aspects like qualifications, yes, there was an issue that was raised about Mlambo, who among the four seemed to have been underwhelming. He's actually a person who allegedly got his LLB only in 2019, and people have raised eyebrows of how a judge could have been in that position without an LLB, but that's something else. But each one was given a chance, and this was quite a robust engagement. And there was an issue where some people said some judges should have been forewarned about the type of questions. But on the whole, South Africa got a chance of looking at the prospective Chief Justices.
No, absolutely. And we speak about the Chief Justices and their worthiness of the top seat in the country's constitutional court. But what about the questioning and the probing of these particular candidates, Prof? Some might say a lot of the questioning may have been unnecessary, particularly because a lot of it had political innuendo and not necessarily focusing on the business of the day, which is the legal proficiency and expertise of these candidates.
Yeah, there may be have been some few questions that were political, but by and large, some questions where certain candidates were found wanting had little to do with their political or the inclination or political overtones. There were questions about their judgments. They were whether they stood the test of time. There were questions about judgments that they themselves had written. There were questions about their administrative skills. And on the whole, there was a very clear position that one of the candidates seems to bring little controversy in all of this. And if one were to actually go into this, if you take somebody like Judge Mlambo, there was a clear reference, and also something that is known, that in the case involving Pearl Protector, it's a judge who had contradicted himself. There's nothing wrong with a judge being unaware of a judgment made by another judge elsewhere, although they should be familiar with what the other judges have said. But when you come up with a judgment that is different from the one that you gave on a similar matter, it raises eyebrows. There was also an issue about when was he recommended to serve on the position as a judge in the Constitutional Court, and some people raised issues around that. You go to Zondo. Zondo himself, there are issues that, of course, before I even move into that, when Judge Mlambo also indicated that there was a judgment that was heavily criticized in the academic circles, and that involved Jacob Zuma, the issue of the separation of powers. And his argument was the matter before him did not deal with that, it dealt with something else. But the commissioners were not convinced that if you are a judge, even if a matter is brought before you and litigants raise something else, and you are aware of something that is fundamental, that is constitutional, you will need to consider that. So his arguments were less convincing. Then you go to Zondo. Zondo, there was an issue of recusal that was raised. And the matter that relates to that had to do with Jacob Zuma, that when you have a personal squabble and there's a history between you and you start arguing on the matters of fact, then you have become both a player and a referee. And the Skakane at that time indicated that because of this, he was also going to lodge a complaint against Zondo. Then there was an issue of Zondo elevating the squabble that he had with Jacob Zuma to a consular matter. And that precipitated a lot of things that ultimately led to the social unrest where many people have died. So when you want to have a Chief Justice, you also want to have somebody with less controversy. Madlanga was somebody who had a real or commanding intellectual presence, but he was flawed at the end by a simple question whether South Africa is ready for a female judge. This is a judge who has written quite progressively and in support of women empowerment. But when the matter was put before him, he seemed to be unable to extricate himself from self-interest into the position to positions that he had historically taken that he was being praised for. So that question flawed him. Even when people like Malema tried to rescue him, he was found wanting. Maya, on the other hand, came out more as a solid in terms of administrative skills, in terms of transformation, in terms of the scholarship, because some people had raised questions about whether she has what it takes to lead at the intellectual level. And she pointed out that she has written over 200 judgments that are solid. She had pointed out that she enjoys the support of almost all deans of faculties in this country. She also went further to indicate that she also broke a record as a judge who had written 2 judgments that were almost captured in one volume of the South African Law Report. So she went on to indicate that don't question my intellectual leadership, don't question my administrative skills. There's evidence of that. Don't even come in with the nonsense that says other judges in the Constitutional Court would not welcome me, because most of those judges where my juniors were in the Supreme Court of Appeal, and I also get along. So most of the criticism that they were leveled at her, she was able to deal with that comprehensively. So in all, if you were to talk about the judge with less controversies, it would have been Maya and Madlanga. But Madlanga, unfortunately, blundered on a matter where he was very strong.
No, absolutely. We've run out of time, but I have to squeeze this last one in, Prof. Maya being recommended, she potentially does become the Chief Justice within the country. No doubt she's got a tough task ahead of her, given the attacks that we've seen on our Constitution and, of course, the judiciary. And, of course, the fact that not every single South African has access to adequate legal representation or legal offering just because of the inefficiencies that exists in various courts across the country. Her task is going to be a difficult one, and support is going to be critical here.
Well, I think from the submission of all the other judges, in a sense, each one was providing a solution that is actually possible. She also brought her own thinking around the making sure that the justice is accessible. So I think the next Chief Justice, whoever that becomes, would have to take on board the suggestions that have emerged from his or her colleagues. For instance, Maya had also suggested that beyond simply the issue of virtual, you also have traditional courts which are underutilized. And of course, that will also it's more than simply bringing the courts closer to the people, but it's also to acknowledge that our people and the majority of our people still use these traditional courts. So what is necessary is the way in which you can find a dialogue between traditional legal system that has been almost on the side and the Western legal system that we have, but also to see how this can be harmonized. But those will be closer to the people, but also you making sure that you piggyback on that which already exists and which has an infrastructure, both in terms of the physical infrastructure as well as the human infrastructure that exists. So she has, or whoever, if it's not her, they have the benefit of insights that emerge from their other colleagues, which they should bring on board.